Welcome back to Theology in Action. I'm Levi Hytry with Tony Caffey. It's been a minute. How you doing?
Good to see you, Levi.
Yeah, good to see you. So we are talking about I think it's a fun topic. I think some people could see it as kind of a tense topic a little bit. We're talking about, if I could encapsulate it in one word, worldliness.
Worldliness is a fun topic, huh, Levi? How dare you?
Absolutely. So this kind of got brought up by Derek, our worship leader, had thrown the idea on the table, and I liked it because we've talked about it at different times and a bunch of different things, and this can be one of my button issues myself. But basically, the thought process is, how are we supposed to act when the world does what the world's going to do? What does it mean to be set apart?
Yeah. You mean the world sometimes is worldly?
Exactly, yeah.
True. Yeah, and I think as Christians, we have an expectation that we are set apart.
Yep.
We're sanctified. But the right phrasing is in the world, but not of the world.
Right.
So we can't move out into the wilderness and be monks in a monastery. That's not what Jesus would have us do. But we're not either to be so like the world that we're indistinguishable as the people of God. So that's a lifelong pursuit. How do I live in the world as a positive influence, even evangelizing, without kind of imbibing or taking on the look and the character and the morals of the world?
Yeah.
I've been striving for that for the last 40 plus years, Levi. So I don't know, maybe we can get to the bottom of this.
Yeah. So I will. First question I'll ask is kind of to draw a distinction in the thought process of some, because I don't know that everybody has kind of come to this realization maybe. Is there a difference in how we as believers, as Christians, are supposed to react or act when another believer is sinning or living worldly, and how an unbeliever or someone in the world is acting when they're sinning?
Yeah, let me read 1 Corinthians. So my answer is yes.
Okay.
Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, "But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, reviler, drunkard, or swindler, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders?"
Yeah.
So Paul's making a distinction between insiders and outsiders, brothers and unbelievers. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? It is not those inside the church. Is it not those inside the church whom you are to judge, he says. God judges those outside. Purge the evil person from among you. So even in Paul's language in 1 Corinthians, he's making a distinction. When believers sin, there's an expectation that the church community has to deal with it. When unbelievers outside of it doesn't mean that we're silent, and maybe that we're going to get to that in a moment. And our world's getting increasingly worldly, I would say, and are doing things that are negatively impacting human flourishing. They're openly pursuing, threats against life in the case of abortion, in the case of euthanasia and other things. There's other moral compromises taking place. It doesn't mean we have to be silent outside the world, but there is a difference in how we treat a believer, a confessing believer within the church from somebody who's outside the church.
Okay. Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think they're really, as a young Christian, I hadn't come to that realization. I thought that, you deal with sin as sin and hadn't learned or grown enough. And a lot of the worldly Christian kind of new age, maybe commingling of the thought process had muddied the waters a little bit on handling everything in love in my mind. So it was an interesting and relieving realization to come to and see that in the scriptures and in Corinthians and other places of there is a distinction how you're supposed to treat your brother in Christ compared to an unbeliever.
Yeah, it is. So church discipline is the broader term, and it's more than just 1 Corinthians 5 that talks about that. And we don't, just to make it really simple, you don't exercise church discipline on somebody outside the church.
Yeah.
It's nonsensical.
Yeah, when I was taking notes for this, I wrote it later, and I'm sure I'll bring it back up. But a few years ago, I had heard the phrase basically talking about the fact like I would get frustrated and amped up and worked up when you'd see either a person or a big organization doing something ungodly or immoral, and I would just react to it. And the thought process and the comment was, well, yeah, they're sinners. They're sinning. What do you
Yeah.
expect them to do? And it's like, oh, I guess you're right. I can't expect someone who doesn't have the repentant work of the Spirit to be repentful or immoral.
Yeah.
It's in their DNA.
Yeah, I think there's a good side to that,
Yeah.
but Jesus spent time with sinners, tax collectors.
Yes.
He's called somebody who was a wine bibber and a glutton because he spent time with that crowd. But Jesus never did that to endorse or to sanction what they were doing. In fact, it was always with a desire to draw them in to faith and the
Right.
community of faith.
Right.
And so that's important.
Yeah.
So I do hear Christians sometimes say, well, I'm more comfortable around unbelievers than believers. And that makes me nervous. Like,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah.
And what are you doing are they uncomfortable around you? They probably
Yeah.
should be, especially if you're trying to point them to Christ. So there's a little bit of gamesmanship, I think, with some Christians when they say things like that, where their intentions aren't as biblical as they think they are.
Yeah. And I want to unpack that. We'll come back to that in a minute. First, I'd like to draw a distinction of what does it mean to be in the world and not of the world. Like, what does that look like? We see, I went to, when I was researching for this, I went to Book of John, and Jesus talks about, I think in 17, what you had talked about of you're supposed to be in the world, not of the world. And in, I think it's 15 verse 19, he talks about the world's going to hate you if you're a believer. So what does that look like? What does it mean to be in the world but not of the world?
Yeah, so for most people, I know I'm a pastor, but I wasn't born a pastor. You live and you work in a community that is not Christian. I mean, maybe there's Christians at your workplace, at the local company that you work at in town. You have neighbors on your block that are believers and unbelievers. So you're in the world. We're not, like I said earlier, monks in a monastery. We're not trying to escape, or even, I lived in central Illinois for several years in an Amish community, and their mindset is very much, let's detach from the world. That, I think, is jettisoning what Christ called us to do. We're not called to move out into the country and churn butter and live separate from the world. You can churn butter if you want to, Levi, but I mean, we're engaged in the world in order to make an impact on the world for Christ. So, but there is a distinction because we are not of the world. John makes that clear in 1 John. So we don't laugh at the same jokes that everybody laughs at. We don't have the same political convictions that those who are opposed to Christ and to biblical ideas have. We're different. We should be discernibly different in the way that we dress. Not that we dress, awkwardly or try to wear something that would be totally different from the world, but there's an expectation of modesty for women, and I would say for men. There's an expectation even that Paul would give us that men should look like men and women should look like women, and that's something that the world, in terms of worldliness, keeps pushing against and trying to blur the categories between those two. So we're going to be in the world. We're going to have jobs. We're going to play basketball. I do. Work out with people that are in the world. We're going to, have exposure, rub shoulders with people in the world, but we're not of them. We've got to be different from what they imbibe in terms of worldliness.
Yeah. So let's dig into that a little bit. You had touched on it, and I think that there's some people with a good meaning heart and maybe not the tools that they need to do that properly, to be in the world and rubbing shoulders with them and wanting to minister and be the right example. They just maybe aren't in the right mindset or place and get, for lack of a better word, corrupted maybe, or pulled into sin. Then I think that I see a lot of, maybe it's my cynicism speaking here, I see a lot of that, and I hear and I think, are you really just saying that to kind of disguise you wanting to live in your sinful life and calling it ministry. Do you think that's going
can
on
be,
much?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think that can be the case, and you need to check your heart. I think there's people that God has wired, not just physically, but metaphysically, in terms of their gifting, spiritual gifting, to be evangelists. And so they're actively engaged with people who don't know Christ because they want to see them come to Christ. And that's great. We need folks like that in our church. And that's probably something they need to check their heart with in terms of, is my influence on the world greater than the world's influence on me? And I mean, and to do some assessment there and say, okay, this part is good, this isn't good. Should I, going to this party and spending time with unbelievers is good because I get to share Christ, but if there's a lot of debauchery at those parties, there's a lot of drunkenness, there's a lot of evil, am I really being as effective as I think I am in a setting like that? Is there a way to still minister to that crowd apart from kind of the silent endorsement of that behavior?
Yeah.
So those are hard questions. It's good if you do have a tendency that direction in terms of your gifting as an evangelist, or just your heart to see friends, family members come to Christ, to have a good conversation partner who can kind of help you process that and think that through. We haven't got to this yet, but I mean, there's the issue of public school, private school, homeschool. Some people intentionally send their kids to public school because they want to be a light in the dark place of that world. Same with private school. Okay, well, I mean, I can see the benefit of that, and I've seen that be very effective in some families. Yeah. But the corrupting influence of the school sometimes is more impactful on the families than vice versa. So that's something that parents need to assess and circle back with.
Yeah, I can say, I can speak from my own personal experience. I kind of wrestle with that back and forth. I did go to public school. It was a very small town. Everybody knew everybody, but I can look back on it and think and remember that it was a good time for me to be a good example and minister and do that. I have worked with youth, with kids for 18 years of my life and have seen a lot of things change, and in certain communities, it's probably a bigger risk than it's worth. And I now have a stepdaughter who we have chosen to homeschool because right now, currently with our situation, just weighing the risk reward of the corruption, what's she being taught, and just is she being taught efficiently compared to, is it worth protecting or allowing her to be a witness? Like, it was a real debate.
Yeah, those are hard issues. I went to public school too, and I can see mostly that was a good experience for me to influence other people. But there were ways that I was influenced negatively too. We have some options for that in terms of the American environment. My nephews and niece who live in Croatia, they don't have homeschool as an option. It's actually forbidden by the government, and that's true in places like Germany and other countries in Europe and other places. So, I mean, each of us as Christians have to process that and make do with the situation that we're in. Single moms, for instance, maybe they don't have the option to homeschool, and so they've got to pray it up and, or forcibly in that case, need to be a light in the dark place and not let that darkness overcome the light. So this is a complex subject, and whenever you even invoke the term homeschool, you get people's dander up. But
absolutely,
I mean, this is really one of those issues where you're trying to be in the world but not of the world. Maybe where you're forced in some cases to be in the world. Some people are in work environments where they've got to keep this job to feed their families, and yet they're being asked to do compromising things from time to time, and you got to either take a stand or try to navigate the trickiness of that, and shrewd as serpent and innocent as doves in Jesus's language. And so that's not an easy thing, but that's the goal. That's the overarching framework, is in the world but not of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. We've even recently done a theology in action where you and Mitch sat and talked about how to be in a work environment and be a good example in that realm. So we can kind of build on that idea, taking it, say, from a kid to an adult. where you have everyday job, you have to work, you interact with these people. And I know even in my heart, sometimes I think I'd just like to buy a piece of land and go homestead, live
Churn your own
peaceable.
butter, huh?
Exactly. Churn your
Go
own butter.
Amish.
Like just not deal with all the stress. Why is that a bad thing? Let's start there.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who grew up in an Amish home, sort of quasi-Amish, and I think his dad broke away first, and then he broke away and became English, not Amish, but English. And yeah, he told me in that Amish environment, every sin that you could imagine is there.
Oh, yeah.
It's just less prevalent or spoken about. So there's issues of sexual sin, there's issues of debauchery, of lying, of cheating, of stealing. I actually know another guy who he kind of like what you were just saying there, he wanted to go Amish. So he bought land from an Amish guy in central Illinois. We're not recording this, are we? And the guy said, "Oh, this is a prime piece of land, and you can build on this, and grow some vegetables and have a farm." Well, so he bought it, paid full price for it, found out that it was actually floodplain, and that you couldn't build on it, and basically this Amish guy cheated him.
Yeah.
And he had so romanticized the idea of being Amish. He's like, how could they do that? I thought this was an idyllic society. Part of me just wanted to say, like, wake up, man. We're all humans. You're not going to escape sin by moving out into the country and living with the Amish. Or I would say, even if you do some research into monasteries could be pretty crazy places where a lot of sin happened and took place. And Martin Luther was confessing all day long because he was constantly sinning, and so were the other people, to the point where the guy he was confessing to was like, "Stop confessing to me. I'm tired of hearing your confession." So that's the world we live into. That's the world we live in. It's not really possible to escape it. Yeah. Not until Christ comes back and then this world gets reformed.
Right, absolutely. And I can say I grew up adjacent to and interacting with quite a bit with growing up shoeing horses with the Amish community. And you do hit a realization at some point of, oh, these are just people. They just live differently. They're sinners just like the rest of us.
Right.
So let's look at that kind of on the other side. We're not supposed to live secluded, separated away. We're supposed to be set apart among them. So where do we... I guess where I'm trying to get is, where do we draw the line as far as what's okay, what's not, what's acceptable, and as far as commingling, and where should I draw a hard line and no, I can't go near that?
Yeah, we're going to have to be a little bit subjective while also being objective. So let's just deal with the objective sides first. You should not engage in sexual immorality in any way, any form. So, if you're being kind of seduced into that or kind of coerced into doing that, watching pornography, wife swapping, or having some kind of being party to that in some way, no. Same with stealing. Let's just go through the 10 Commandments. In terms of covetousness, if that's an issue and you need to distance yourself, then you need to do that. Murder, etc. Okay, so that's objective. Those are objective issues. Now there's the subjective categories as well. In terms of movie watching and video games and other backyard barbecues that you can spend time with people. Could that be a sinful environment? Yes, but it doesn't have to be. I play basketball until I got hurt with people, and there's a lot of sin on the basketball court, and for the most part, I'm able to avoid it. But if there was a sense in which I couldn't avoid it and couldn't avoid losing my temper or cussing at people, and then I probably should back out of that environment. So that's just a sensitivity to the Holy Spirit, where you sense like, okay, this is not healthy for me, or I'm being more influenced than I am being influential, and I need to step out of that environment. I hope that answers your question.
It does.
And, I know people hate subjectivity, like the Holy Spirit,
it's hard.
But that's got to be part of the equation because there are these gray issues that we've got to navigate.
And I'll add to what you're saying, and then I'll muddy the waters even more in a minute. I do think also something I learned by being young and passionate and diving headlong when I just wasn't mature enough into some of the things and realized, oh, this is hurting me more than helping, is you need to be at some level of maturity and consistent in your walk with Christ.
Yeah.
Daily in your word, prayer, have mentors. You need to have the structure in the place so they can keep you accountable and you're
Yes.
willing to listen to them as well. I see a lot, and I think at some point we've talked about it as well. People get saved at whatever point in their life, say mid-20s, and they, oh, this is amazing. I want everyone else to experience it. And they just run out headlong into the streets and try to evangelize and don't know how to defend what they're saying, or the world just gets their grip back into them and pulls them back into them. Before they know it, they're lost in the midst of it all. And so I think that you need to be consistent in yourself first and in your walk before you think you can do much for others.
Yeah, I'll use the term tethered. You need to be
Yes.
tethered in your relationship to the Lord and to Scripture, but also tethered to the local church community to help you. I actually like that part of new believers because I feel like when somebody comes to Christ, especially at an older stage of life, in their teens or 20s or 30-something, they still have these networks of people that are unbelievers that they can impact. And, that's harder for me. I have to intentionally go do stuff to build those networks, whereas they just naturally have them already. So there's something inside of me that says, yes, leverage those relationships for opportunities for evangelism, but I think your caution is well received. Stay tethered to the Lord, stay tethered to the church community, even as you engage in that way.
So muddying the waters a little bit, I'll use kind of a personal example in talking about homosexuality, just because I have had coworkers and friends who had that lifestyle, and I wrestled with at different points they always knew what I thought. They always knew, I don't agree with what you're doing. I'm not going to hate you as a human being. You're a sinner. We all have our sin. I love you. But I personally wrestled with how much of this does it seem like is acceptance in this community? I'm known as a believer as this. Do other people look at this and think that I'm just accepting and therefore they think it's okay? Or do these people, I really struggled and wrestled with, where's the line there? I know friends who have had friends growing up who lived that lifestyle and were invited to weddings and wrestled with, should I go or shouldn't I? Is that still just a subjective thing, or do you think there's a harder line in there?
Well, I mean, you can't be responsible for how other people
Right.
perceive what
Exactly.
you're doing. But if you just replace the word homosexual with tax collector and read the Gospels with that
Yes.
mindset, okay, what did Jesus do with tax collectors, and what did he not do? What did
Right.
he not condone? He didn't condone the sinfulness, but at the same time, he was willing to interact, love, and minister, even, pretty directly to that segment of the population. So I think that I remember preaching through Matthew and really being struck by that for the first time, like, oh, Jesus hung out with sinners. I think that was even the title of my sermon, at least one or two sermons. And just how meaningfully that was in terms of a way to encourage engagement with the world. Jesus did this. Jesus was uncorrupted by those influences, and yet at the same time, he spoke truth, loved them, and welcomed them into a better way. So, this is probably a good answer for everything, but we need to be more like Jesus,
Absolutely,
Levi.
absolutely, and I will agree completely. We're also teetering on the edge of one of my soapboxes. Is I hear that used a lot,
Yeah.
and it's used wholly improperly. Jesus mingled with the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the this, that, the other, and they're using it as this, and we've said it a lot, as this God is love mindset, and they're using it to say, accept this person,
Right.
and accept what they're doing, and that's how you're going to win them over. And that's not the true accurate, and we've talked about it, we're touching on it. That's not what that means. It's not accepting what they're doing.
Jesus
interacting
mingled with them.
exactly.
Defined mingled.
Exactly.
Yes, it wasn't tacit approval of their sinful behavior.
Yeah.
In fact, it was the exact
He drew a hard
opposite.
line on a lot of
Yeah,
things. Yeah.
yeah. So and we need to probably qualify this as well. Jesus was sinless, perfectly sinless in every way, and was unimpressionable. Is that the right word? In terms of their influence on him, we're not Jesus.
Right.
We want to be like Jesus, but we're way more impressionable
Yeah.
in our interaction with people. So we need to be careful, even as we adopt Jesus's evangelistic techniques, that we are susceptible in ways that he wasn't.
Absolutely.
So that's why we need to stay tethered, and that's why we need to be, I guess just discerning in our interaction with those who are unbelievers.
Well, and I think that there's a good example in him as well, and we talked about it, and we can dig into it a little more of the world's going to hate you as a Christian. Like that is a harsh reality that I think a lot of Christians, they don't want to accept. They want to be liked, and they want to be approved maybe by people, but there's going to be a distinction and a hard line. And I think as we come closer to the end of the world, whether you think it's a week from now or 1,000 years from now, as that time comes closer, I think that line is drawn much harder in the sand. Would you agree?
Agreed. Yes. So if you're doing it in order to be liked, then you're on the wrong mission.
Right. Absolutely. So let's kind of dig into that. I think that the world is in a very tense place right now. At least our nation. I can say that for sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things going on that are immoral or questionable. I look and it burns in me a righteous anger, I hope, of that shouldn't be happening. This is not right, and we shouldn't be accepting this. Do you think? I've mentioned to you, I've tried to flesh this thought out, and I hopefully I can put it out, and you can put it better in better words. Do you think that the thought process is? Let me step back. With everything going on, a lot of people are thinking that they need, as a Christians, that they need to change their approach or be more aware or be ready for more because we're coming closer to the end or the world's just in this tense time. Do you think that's the case? Or I have the thought of maybe it's really God has told us how we're supposed to be living this whole time, and we just haven't been consistent with it, and we just always need to be aware and be consistent in what we're doing. Does that make sense at all?
I think there is more hostility towards Christianity. I do think that's going to uptick as we get closer to Christ's return. I do think we still need to be outspoken advocates for those laws and principles that God upholds. So John the Baptist called out a heathen sinner for marrying his brother's wife, and Jesus was not afraid to do that either with sinners. So it's not like we have to be silent and stay in our lane as Christians, so to speak. But we do need to be realistic with the fact that our influence may wane as the timing of Christ's returns gets near, and we need to be faithful. I think you were alluding to this, that maybe it was easier in a previous time to be a Christian, or to kind of fake it or be under the radar. It is more difficult today, and that's not exactly that's not in my mind wholly negative. The idea of a kind of religious mindset in America, which was an ethos that spread everywhere. I do miss that because there were some benefits associated with that. But at the same time, like there was a lot of false understanding about Christ and the gospel and about salvation that was kind of built into that world that was in many ways ecumenical. And so now, I mean, if you're going to follow Christ, like really follow Christ, there's a cost associated with it. And so that whittles away some of those who are just kind of along for the ride.
Yeah,
and I don't see that as a bad thing.
Yeah, I would agree. If I could put it kind of in a sports thought or sports analogy, you can practice all day long, and practice reps, practice shots are great, and they're going to help for the real game. But pressure is different, and there's nothing like the real getting in and getting the real game experience. That is where you learn and grow. And I think that this pressure is helping to sharpen believers' tools and maybe sifting through and filtering what really should be there and what should not be.
I love the sports metaphors.
Yeah.
Keep them coming, Levi.
I think that's all the questions I have. Did you have any final thoughts, takeaways from this?
Sure. Read the book of First John.
Yeah,
I think that's really helpful for understanding what it means to walk in the light as he is in the light, and to be in the world and not of the world. We have content online at vbvf.org on First John that we worked through. 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John.
Yeah.
So take a look at that if you're looking for more specific details about how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that is all the time that we have. As always, thank you, Tony. If you're interested in more of our content, he talked about 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. You can go to vbvf.org. You can go check out our past sermons. We do live stream on Wednesdays and Sundays as well. You can also check out Another Theology in Action. We'll have that linked right here for you. Until next time, God bless.